Our body never gets addicted to our own neuroscience. Our physiology is such that one new thought can create up to 3,000 different neurochemicals. So the most powerful pharmacy on earth is not in the corner drugstore, it's between our ears.
Welcome to the 2% Factor podcast, where we explore where small things that happen along your life, choices you make, decisions you make along your journey, how they end up having a massive impact on your story. On today's episode, we have CEO and founder of BrainTap, Dr. Patrick Porter. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dan. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So BrainTap is a really interesting company. It ultimately is around maximizing brain function, around thinking, around sleeping, around performance. And so we'll get into that in terms of your passion around that and how that's helping people. But before we do that, let's back this up a little bit. And I want to break down your story for the audience a little bit so we can hear how you ended up getting to where you're at and then ultimately where you're going from here. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So tell us a little bit about where things started from you. A lot of significant things happened kind of in your childhood that ended up shaping your psyche, your decision making, some of the things that set up your core values, if you will. Why don't you back us up a little bit to some key moments for you back, before you moved into adulthood?
Yeah. Well, actually, it started in second grade, actually, when I was held back. Um, I really, I really wasn't interested in school. I was interested in art and drawing and doing those kind of things. So I just pretty much didn't do it. And then when I was held back in second grade, of course, I was a wake up call. All my friends moved on, and then I didn't. And so I realized that, they were treating me as if I had learning disabilities and my dad didn't think I had learning disabilities. But around that same time, my dad was getting help with his alcoholism. And the church founders came over, the priest and nun came over and said, Michael, we're going to teach you this thing called the Silva method. And the Silva method, for those who don't know, is a technique where you learn to go to level, they call it. We would call it going to alpha now, and then you would visualize things that you want to accomplish in your life. And there was also some other things they would do, but my dad went to that one seminar and it changed the course of our whole family. Basically, he came home and never drank again, because he realized that he was drinking to relax, and that wasn't really working too well for him. He was a very bad alcoholic. But once he found out that he could meditate the Silva method way, which was going to level, he decided to teach it to his whole family. So he taught it to us as well. So that really changed. It also changed his parenting. And I think one of the things I always encourage when I used to be in private practice and I would work with teens, I said, I encourage people to do what my dad did. When I got in trouble after my dad got help, we never were sent to our room to think about what we did. That's probably the worst thing a parent can do, because why would you send them there to think about what they did? That's what prison does. And we all know that 2/3 of prisoners are returned because they think they can get away with it next time. And that's really what, if you tell them to think about it. So what my dad did was he had me read a book called As a Man Thinketh. And it's a very easy book to read, but he didn't just have me read it. I had to come out and tell him how I was going to apply that knowledge.
Hmm.
And that started at a very early age. And by the time I was 18, I had read every self-help book you could think of because I got in a lot of trouble. So it started to sink in, and that really transformed my life starting at that early age. Just knowing that my thinking, what I think about, I bring about, was a big like wake up call for me.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I was just reading an article yesterday about uh, there's certain go-to places for people when they get stressed, right? And I'm just thinking about your dad going to alcohol, two of the primary places being food and alcohol, and or drugs,
Right.
right? In order to kind of reduce anxiety and cope, if you will, a bit of a coping mechanism.
Yeah. And my dad was 400 pounds. My mother was 350. So they definitely looked for food. I just thought it was, they were brought up in Iowa, and I was told that the Iowans expand faster than the universe. So that's what happens there. But yeah, we also, one of the things that changed, my mother went to an iridologist. I mean, we had 9 kids in our family. We were all spazzes. And she went through them and he said that we need to get off white sugar and all the dyes.
Yeah.
And we were very fortunate to grow up in Battle Creek, Michigan. That's where the very first health food store in the world was. So
Really?
Dr. Kellogg, not the Kellogg cereal company, which a lot of people misinterpret, but Dr. Kellogg was a wellness practitioner, and he was also Seventh-day Adventist. So he uh, basically no one ate any meat there. We were meat eaters, but we went there to get the foods that were healthier. So we started eating healthy foods. And when I graduated high school, they said I was going to replace Ewell Gibbons. I don't know if some of your listeners might remember that. I was going to replace Ewell Gibbons in the grape nuts commercials because I eat only healthy foods. I brought my own food through school, and that changed our whole family. The diet end of it did, and I still believe you can't outthink a bad diet. That's you've got to eat the right foods.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So your dad, how did your dad know, by the way, to encourage you to read self-help books rather than putting you in your room and saying, "Hey, I want you to think about this"? How did he know? Was he educated in terms of these techniques?
Well, he got educated before he got help with the Silva method. He probably have went to 10 or more 30-day facilities,
Okay.
and so they're drumming it into his head. The problem was that emotion drives behavior, not logic. So his emotional state when he wanted to drink overrode his logical mind. He's a very smart man. When he was alive, he was a Mensa, graduate, so he's very smart. So he had a saying that as we were growing up, he never wanted us to end up like him, first of all. And he said that the reason he was like that is he wasn't educated. So he went to school, he got his PhD and things like that. And there's a whole story behind that. But he basically knew that he had to keep educating himself. He went to that one seminar and realized that experiences shape behavior, not books.
Mhm.
But that's why he had us read a book and how we were going to apply it. And then we would have a meeting that night to say, how did that application go? So, the old thing about what you observe improves, so that was his whole job after that was, helping the family not fall into the trap. And we're very lucky out of 9 kids. We only had one brother that for a while tried to prove that he could beat alcoholism, but
Yeah.
he couldn't.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. That is really, really quite a gift that your dad saw things that way, had the mindset that he did, and to work with his kids on ensuring they had a better life. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. In my first book, Awaken the Genius, I actually have a chapter how I was blessed to be the son of an alcoholic
Yeah.
because he went through it. If he didn't go through it, I would have had to, because so many people are just repeating the sins of their parents and
Right.
then blaming their parents for it.
Right.
And the reality is if my dad was doing it, why do I need to do it? You don't have to. And he showed us there was a different way to do it. And I think it was very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's inspiring for listeners that, you know, just because your parents' path is what it is doesn't mean it needs to be your path, and everything should be a mission to make it better for your kids, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's terrific. Good. Okay, so that clearly instilled some significant wiring almost with you, I would guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it made me believe. I still remember when I was a freshman in high school, I went up to my dad and I said, I knew it would make him happy. I said, I'm going to be captain of the football team. And I was 98 pounds, soaking wet. I mean, I didn't look like the captain of the football team. And he told me, he said, hey, faith without works is dead. So we put together a workout plan. And that workout plan included something that wasn't available then. Nowadays, people just think every gym in America was around and had weights, but the Catholic school we went to did not have a weight room. So I had to raise the money to create a weight room with the group, and it got me to be a little entrepreneur about it. And I started a club at the school, And then I went to Springfield, which was not a Catholic school, but I went there and I did the same thing. And then what happened the senior year, I didn't realize it, but every day for 4 years, I'd been running by my future coach's house, which I didn't know that he was even a football coach. But our school, my senior year, got a new coach. His name was Jim Ward. And he pointed me out to the whole group. He said, now, this kid, he said, what's your name? He said, I've seen you running by my house, whether it's raining, snowing, whatever the weather. I said, yeah, I haven't missed a day since I started 6 years ago running. And he basically changed the rules on voting for captain, because usually your captain is the one who has the most friends, right? In that, and what he said was, we're going to have everybody who's playing football in high school. That meant the freshmen, the sophomores, the juniors, and the seniors. And because I had started a weightlifting club and a running club, they all loved me. And the guys that were that might have been the captains before, they were hazing them, beating them up, doing all those things. So it was a shoe-in for me to be the captain, and I became a three-sport captain. Yeah, I ended up with 10 varsity letters in high school.
Wow.
So because I was so small, I wrestled 4 years as a varsity. Started out at 112 and ended up at 178. So those kind of things. And then I ran track. Luckily I was very fast. That's how I got a track scholarship. But it all started because my dad put together an action plan. He said, a goal without a plan is a wish. And he used to say that to us all the time. He says, you gotta take action.
I love it. And let's dig into that for just a second. The fact that, and because these things come out in this podcast when we end up talking to folks, like it's not that you knew the coach lived there and you planned any of that. It was that you were doing the right things at a fundamental level,
Right.
and ultimately good things came from that. The gentleman who ends up being the coach ends up happen to be on your running route, and that impacts the character that he sees in you, and on the story that you told. It's just interesting. It's one of my favorite things about having these conversations is a lot of times when people look at where someone's at, they don't, it's hard for people to see what, where it started and what habits were created and ultimately, in order to achieve those goals. And so that's why we try to pull these things out, right? Because if you can hear that and say, okay, right, that's not a quick thing. You did it for 6 years
Right.
because you put your plan together to get fit and get stronger and get faster and overcome an objection, which is the fact that you're 98 pounds.
Hmm.
And
Right.
that doesn't exactly fit naturally into the goal of being a captain of the football team,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
So how are you going to make that happen? The gap between where you're at, where you want to go, and what's the action plan to make it happen?
Yeah. And I still think about that whatever mission or whatever assignment or whatever I'm going to do in work, in business, I always think I started out as the lowest of the low before, and I've usually become the best at whatever I've done.
Yeah.
So, it's just a matter of sticking with it. So many people will quit when it gets hard, and instead of realizing, now I know I'm building neuroplasticity. That's a joke I have with my wife. When things are stressful, I go, wow, you can almost feel that neuroplasticity building. So.
That's good. Um, Let me ask you this before we move on from the years up until college and beyond. Was there one book that stands out for you among all the different ones that you read as a child? Was there one book that stands out for you now as an adult that shaped your life and that you would recommend?
Well, it's As a Man Thinketh. I still carry it on my phone. I know Steve Jobs had Autobiography of a Yogi, which I really like that book too. But I think that's a long book. That's an investment of time and energy to read that one. Anybody can read As a Man Thinketh, and they also now have As a Woman Thinketh. So if there's somebody out there that wonders, but I think that profoundly changed the way I think about the universe, that my thinking actually shapes my behaviors. And if I can align my thinking, my intentions, and my actions, I can achieve miracles. But if any one of those three are out of alignment, I'm not going to achieve.
Hmm.
that's probably the key one. But I've read, I mean, I still read 5 books a month. So, and I've been doing that since I was a kid. I try to read one a week, but because there's 4.4 weeks in a month, I just do five. So that's what I do.
That's good. Take us through what happened from there.
Well, what happened from there was, of course, I was gearing up to be this big football star and everything. Because I mean, I went to Michigan's football camps, University of Michigan, Western Michigan, and all these things. And then my senior year, I got a dislocated shoulder. And so obviously there wasn't a lot of recruitment going on after that happened because it was a severe. I did end up getting a track scholarship to a school called Ferris State. But what happened to me was and I was a fullback and an outside linebacker, but in the JV lost their coach and they let me call plays. It was the first year the JV team ever had a winning record. And I was calling the plays. So I realized I was a natural coach, that I was doing this. So I went to college, I came back and I became a coach. And I probably would never have thought of that if I would have not been injured, and of course, eventually I always wanted to be a coach and a school teacher, but then I realized if I wanted to have anything financially, that probably wasn't the way to go unless I wanted to stick it out. Like you hear these coaches living in their cars and, doing internships for years. I mean, I do have patience, but not that much patience, so I went back to school and it took me 12 years to get my PhD, but I went to school and I learned how to do what my dad did. I started helping him with the seminars and things of that nature and found out that I really like getting up in front of people and working. And I wasn't old enough to really do therapy yet because people looked at me like, who's this young guy? But of course, about 92, I started in business for myself doing, in 85, I actually found out about light and sound. That's what happened to me there. So we moved to Phoenix because of a series of events. I actually got bisulfite poisoning in a plant that I was working at,
What was
and
the poisoning?
it's called bisulfite. I worked at a chrome plant. They chrome plated the parts for the big three automotive companies,
Okay.
and it's part of this bisulfite was used in a tank to drop heavy metals out so it wouldn't go into the environment. And when I was fixing it, the pump turned on and basically I breathed it in and I had chemical pneumonia.
Mm.
And it was a really bad situation. And it was life threatening, but I had an experience in the hospital actually that most people would say it was like a near death experience, although I didn't see a tunnel or a white light, but I did have a spontaneous healing that happened. Um, and I don't know if I was hallucinating or if it was real, but a being came into my hotel room and healed me. And after that, I changed my whole direction of life and I decided to really double down and go back to school and start helping people. And I had a mission to help other people learn to heal themselves. And during that, I moved to Arizona because I felt that that was a better place for me to learn and be around people in the self-help industry because in the 80s in Michigan, that was like the desert,
Yeah.
for that kind of thing.
Right.
And Phoenix was kind of the place to go. And I also wanted to learn about yoga and things like that. And Paramahansa Yogananda had a place there, and Yogi Bhajan had his ashram there. So I went and studied with them for 5 years to learn. I already knew about meditation, but I didn't know anything about yoga because I was very strict Catholic. So you would never even think of that. But after I was healed, I just opened my mind to other things. And the guy I was working with, I was a counselor at his church, and he told me I should go to Vegas. I don't know how he knew this, but somehow he knew. He said, "You're going to meet somebody there that's going to change the direction of your life, and you're going to change the way that people do what you do."
Who gave you this advice?
His name is Gil Gilly.
But
He
you
grew up
were.
with a man named Ernest Holmes, who started the Church of Religious Science,
Hmm.
and he could. Some people might think this is BS, but he could literally read your mind.
Okay,
He
I just I want to track this. So can we back up just one second?
Sure.
Just okay. Tell us, because this was a massive 2% factor moment for you, the healing.
Mhm.
What happened in that healing? Other people may have experienced something similar. What was that? You mentioned a being came into the room. Like, what was that experience for you?
Well, I had sleep paralysis while it was happening. I could not move. I was just laying there, and all I heard in my head was go to sleep. But for 2 weeks before that, I could not sleep. My body was so polluted. And the next morning, they were going to do a full blood transfusion on me because this bisulfites or whatever was in my bloodstream. And that night, actually, I went and called my sister. This was before phones were in hospital rooms. So I had to go out to the hall, and I couldn't talk before that. And I was talking to her. She said, "Patrick, you can talk." And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, what did they say?" And I said, "All I heard was go to sleep." She said, "Why don't you go back in and go to sleep?" And my brain's not thinking right. And I said, "Well, I've tried to sleep, but I can't." She said, "Just go in and go to sleep." So I went back into my hotel, into my room there, into my hospital room. I laid down, went to sleep. They woke me up the next morning at about 10:30, and they drew blood because they were going to do this blood transfusion. They came back and they drew blood again. And then the doctor came in and he said, how do you feel?" And I said, "I feel great. I'm like on top of the world." He says, "Something's changed here." He said, "There's nothing in your bloodstream." They kept me in the hospital for almost 2 months to try to figure out what they did to me, which they did nothing. They didn't do it at all, but I couldn't tell them that a golden being, entered into my room and healed me. So I played it out. And because the plating company, it was called Production Plated Plastics, if they were paying my car and my house payment and everything while I was in the hospital, I couldn't leave until the doctor said I was okay. So they're trying to figure out how they healed me. And that's when I started reading a lot more. I like during that time, I remember reading Vernon Howard's book, The Power of Positive Thinking, and Maxwell Maltz's Psychocybernetics. And I had a lot of time. I'm just sitting in the hospital, and they thought that I was psychologically something was wrong with me, and they couldn't figure out why there was nothing in my bloodstream. So they told me, they said, "We're going to give you a year off, go heal." They didn't know what to think of me, so, but I felt like I was trapped in this hospital. So I left for Phoenix.
Okay.
During that time, I had read about Parahansa Yogananda, and I'm not smart enough to know he wasn't alive anymore. When I drove out there, I realized that's when they said he wasn't alive. His center was there, and you could learn from the nuns and the brothers that were there. But that the whole thing was that I still don't know to this day what happened to me. Really, I mean, I went on a quest to find out what healed
It
me.
sounds, that's what it sounds like, right? It's like what happened is not supposed to happen. You can't explain it, and you got to find out more about the unknown, if you will,
Right.
is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And what was really kind of synchronicity about it was my dad used to run a thing in Kalamazoo, Michigan called ESP Forum, where he'd bring in all these like we they were weird people, that at the time they were more like people like California or Arizona, not like Michigan. So I was exposed to some of that, but I really wasn't let's say a believer. I was probably the least believed of anything that my dad did. I mean, I did it for myself, and I was very self-centered. I did it for sports, I did it for my school, but I didn't think about using this technology for other people. But after that happened to me, I felt this strong desire to. I was going to school for electronics, first of all, not for therapy, not for counseling. So I had to change everything and
That was your undergrad.
stop.
Your undergrad was more in that
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
engineering.
Since then, I've met quite a few people. Actually, a guy named Stephen E., who wrote a compilation book. He heard the story and he put my story in one of his books. There were, I think, 14 or 15 people in his miracles book where they talked about miracle healings that had happened to them.
Mm.
Like and I just read one not too long ago, a few years ago, called Dying to Be Me, that Wayne Dyer used to promote, where the woman basically had a spontaneous healing of cancer. She was, basically ready to go. And then this entity or this energy healed her.
Mm.
So I'm not the only one that it's ever happened to. And
Yeah.
it's just happened to me. And it was pretty profound. It changed, obviously changed the direction of my life because I was not going to move out of Battle Creek. I mean, all my friends were there and I thought I had a good life, but when I think back on it, it was not a good life. It was just self-serving.
What was the typical kind of continued situation when you have that diagnosis? Is it something that they can heal over time, typically that takes years, or that's, how do they deal with that normally versus what ended up happening to you?
They didn't know how to handle it. They'd never had anybody at this hospital that ever had this chemical poisoning. So that's why they said that what I was doing wasn't, I went on a vegetable fast. So I only ate vegetables because I figured I needed to cleanse my body. And they said that's probably the worst thing because it dumped all the pollutants into my bloodstream, but I was a big one for eating healthy anyway. So I was trying to, that's why I went into the Seventh-day Adventist hospital because they only serve you vegetarian food. I'm not a vegetarian anymore, but I was for 18 years. But I soon realized I'd not seen a healthy vegetarian and I didn't want to end up like the unhealthy vegetarians I had seen, so, but at the time I thought that's what I needed to do. And they didn't know what to do. They thought it was psychological, even though it was a physical problem.
Hmm.
That's why they kept me in the hospital for 2 months, and they kind of explained away that it all went away because it really wasn't in my body anyway. And I'm going, well, we had tests. We were, is it, so I at first I was fighting with the doctors because I wanted to leave, and they were telling me it was one thing, and I'm saying, wait a minute, you just told me 2 days ago it was this other thing, and they didn't know how to handle it because if it's not in the PDR, they
Yeah.
don't know what to do, and that's why to me it's and I do a lot of work with doctors. So, but the average doctor only lives to be 56 years old, I come to find out, and they only deal with sick care. I needed to find somebody who deals with healthcare, that's actually helping people to get well, not just helping people to get better or, fix a broken leg or something like that. They were treating me like I was a car and we're complex energy beings, that we can't even explain. Nobody knows how the brain works even today. So we can get the outcomes from the brain, but we don't know how that happens. It's a
Right.
quantum computer, so we don't
Right.
know how all this happens.
Okay, so you go on this spiritual journey to Arizona to pursue, some understanding of what's happened. At this point, you have your doctorate or don't have your doctorate?
No, I just have a bachelor's.
Okay, you got your bachelor's, more on the tech side, engineering side. You're
Yep.
out in this journey. Then when did you go in? Then you end up going to meet somebody who says you need to go to Vegas because you need to.
Right. Before that, even what happened was because my dad was a Silva instructor, and then he learned to do hypnosis. And so there was a Dr. Paul Adams out of Novi, Michigan, that my dad and I were talking. We had both moved to Phoenix at that time. And this is the way therapists talk. We're great therapists. We don't have any clients, but we're great therapists, and we need money to do it. And so we're sitting there talking like that. And like magic, the phone rings. It's Paul Adams. And he tells my dad that he wants to open up a clinic in Scottsdale so he can have a reason to go out there and visit his father. And would he be willing to run the practice? And my dad says, no, thanks. We're trying to do our own thing here. And I'm hearing this. We just talked about it. I mean, it'd be like you and I just talking about something and it just happened. And I said, Dad, what are you talking about? He goes, well, he wanted us to run his clinic. And we want to do our own thing. I said, no, we want to help people. I said, do you mind if I call Paul back? And so I called Paul. He said that he wanted to run the clinic. He didn't know me really. He knew my dad,
Yeah.
but he didn't know me. He knew I was Michael's son, but he didn't know me. And I said, okay, I'm going to get that for you. Within 2 days, he had it sitting on his desk. I FedExed him all the information he asked for. And he called me back. He says, you're serious about this, aren't you? And I said, I'm serious. I said, if you come out here, I'll run this office for you. I'll be your intern. You don't even have to pay me, until we start making money. I said, I'll do this because I wanted to learn from somebody who'd already done it.
Yeah.
And my dad was so myopic about his belief system that it had to be him. And this happened over and over again in my journey, really, with my dad, that I had to, kind of wake him up to what was reality. And so, anyway, with Paul, he came out, we started the clinic. Within 3 years, I bought the whole thing from him. I owned the franchise.
And how old were you at this point?
I was 27.
Okay, you're 27, so this is like
So I
1990.
started with him when I was 24.
Yeah.
So in basically he trained me on what he did, and he was a very good marketer. And so I learned very quickly that you can be the best at anything, but you don't have marketing. Who cares? You have to have clients, right? So, but in the middle of that, from me working for Paul and starting positive changes, I met this group with this SILS machine, the sensory input learning system, that was a clinical device that cost $10,000. And because of my belief system and what I was trained at, I didn't have $10,000, but I never let money stand between me and what I want. And so I basically kept going back to their booth at this event in Vegas. And on the last day, I go back, and this Linnea and Larry, they're both, Larry's really upset, Linnea's crying. And I said, what's going on? The show wasn't very good for you. And they said, no, Dr. Robertson died. And I said, oh my God, what does that mean? She goes, well, you see those two machines over there? Those are the only two we have. He didn't leave any record of how to build these.
Wow.
And I said, what are you going to do? And they said, well, we have family in Scottsdale. We're going to end up down there, and we'll figure out what we're going to do. I said, I have an office in Scottsdale. I have a degree in electronics. I said, if you bring these to my office, we can reverse engineer them and we can build them. So synchronicity
Wow.
happened.
And so, Dr. Porter, this is after you bought the company.
This is before I bought the
Oh,
company.
right before you bought it.
right
Okay.
in the, right in the middle of that time period where I didn't know Paul Adams yet at
Yeah.
that point. What happened was this group, Larry and Linnea, they didn't have any money. They were salespeople. They weren't technology people. So, but as things go, I lost their phone number, and this was before cell phones. So I'm going, oh my God, I'm sabotaging myself. So I'm thinking, what can I do? What can I do? And I knew they were going to be in Scottsdale, and that's where I lived. And a friend of mine who eventually became my publisher, he called me up. He said, Patrick, I met these two people down here in Mesa. They're phenomenal people. Do you mind if I bring them by your office? Because I think you'd really like to meet them. He didn't tell me anything about them. I didn't even put the two together. When they showed up, here they are carrying the Sills machine into my office. So I'm thinking, this has got to be a movie.
Yeah.
Somebody's shooting this movie. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just a player in this
Yeah.
performance. So they show up, and we reverse engineer this device, and we hire an engineer because I kind of oversold my skill set in but I got them there, and we all worked together. And then we built a little one. We were building them out of Radio Shack parts. So we would go to Radio Shack, buy all the parts, build them in the back office. And I started selling them because nobody had any money at the time. And they go, how many do you think we can sell? I said, I can probably sell as many as you build. I said, my clients are buying them. I'm going to events, they're buying them.
And what would the device do? What did the device help people with?
They were called the MC Square. That's what we called it. It was a little portable light and sound machine, kind of like first generation brain tap. I mean,
Mm.
I built it for myself first because I wanted one for my clinic to help people. And then we never did build the clinical model because we just kept building these portable ones.
And what was the purpose of his clinic originally before you started getting into the tech space of?
Uh, it was a stop smoking clinic.
Okay. All right. Got
We
it.
help people stop smoking.
Yeah.
We were addiction clinic, really.
Yeah. So you're in this phase of your life where you're like, hey, I want to help people. I'm going to go work with this guy who's a friend of my dad's, help people with kind of the psychology and counseling, if you will,
Mhm.
around
Yep.
stopping smoking. And then I hear what happened in terms of this box and the equipment and the product. What was the purpose of the product? What would the product do?
The product would balance the hemispheres and put you into a state very much like meditation. But we were doing it for biofeedback to because we could show people if you could have warm hands, you could slow down your respiration and your heart rate, you could get rid of pain. So we were developing it for pain clinics. And then we realized that it helped people learn faster and better and all these other things that it's evolved into. But at the time, it was for basically to help people with stress and pain.
Gotcha. Yeah. And kind of mind body
Mhm.
connection and then
Yeah,
different outcomes that can and purposes that can be around that.
yeah,
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So next thing you know, you got these it sounds like the product started taking off and
yeah.
started booming a little bit.
Yeah. And then in 89, when we went to the Consumer Electronics Show, we had went a couple years before that, but in 89, we had they developed a really nice looking one. It wasn't made from Radio Shack, you know, it was actually a production model. And we got the best new gadget of the year. We were on the front cover of the Consumer Electronics Show magazine. Actually, that was the downfall of this company. I didn't own the company. I didn't know enough about business at that time. They basically had my therapy company and they were working out of my clinic and they took orders for 100,000 units, but we got back about they sold 10,000, they made 10,000, sent them out, and I think they all came back at least, maybe even one more. Because this is a technology that was before cell phones, before CDs, before MP3s. Nobody knew what it was. And they set it on the shelves of these big box stores like Kmart and Circuit City and Fry's Electronics, and nobody knew what it was, so nobody was buying it. And I told them that what they should do is go out to professionals. And because the doctors and the clinics already have people and they could have them try it and then they try it and they would buy it. Exactly what we're doing now. We've been doing it for almost 40 years now. But they thought I was crazy. Well, then they they basically abandoned the company. And I was able, because I helped them find the manufacturer and all that. I went to the manufacturer and I said, Ray, his name was Ray. I said, don't destroy this inventory. I'm going to sell it. He goes, you're going to sell 10,000 units. I said, yeah, I am. And what we did was when I bought Paul's business, was called Positive Changes, I converted it into a franchise. And I
Okay.
sold 108 and I sold 108 locations and we sold those units within 2 years out of those locations. And
All
then
right.
we just started making other equipment.
Let me ask you this. So you mentioned you bought out Paul at 27, which is super young, right?
Hmm.
Really young age to buy a business. During, I just want to put the timeline together here for a minute. So you had not bought the business out yet. You were there from kind of ages 24 to 27, ran into
Right.
this other couple, brought them in also as partners, if you will, and then ultimately bought him out at 27 years old, what, in like 1990-ish?
Yeah, it was actually 88.
Okay. And then after you bought him out, then you ended up finding another use for the products that
Yes.
you could then distribute through a franchise model.
Yes.
Okay. And so as you went through this buyout process, just backing up to that for a second, that's a pretty substantial thing to deal with at 27.
Yeah.
How'd you deal with all that?
Well, Paul ran into some health problems and he was basically told us, I'm getting out of this business. I'm going to retire and whatever. And I said, well, I want to buy the business. And my dad at the time wanted to be a partner with me, but my dad wasn't. Everything I did, I had to struggle with my dad. My dad wanted to do it the old struggle way, and I said, Dad, you just do your thing. So I actually had a split with my dad in the business at that time, which was amicable. I said, look, I'm going to give you the business we built. You just take it. I'll go start my own business, and we'll just split because I was getting married. That's when I got married to my wife, and she didn't want to work with my dad because basically, when you work for your dad, even though I was running the company, I wasn't getting paid the lion's share of the money because he was the senior, right? He was Dr. Porter, and I was still going to school, So that's how it works. So when we split up, and my wife happened to be a great writer, so she trained with people like Jay Abrams and Dan Kennedy and all those people. And really, she made the franchise because we had a good product, but you have to, and she became the marketing end of it. So I jokingly say I married my editor, so to speak, because I could, and she still does it today. She's very good. But in the process, I didn't know any better. Like I didn't know. I just did exactly what Paul taught me, and it worked. I didn't try to recreate at that time. But then a friend of mine, the one same friend that became my publisher that brought over Larry and Linnea, he said to me, Patrick, he said, you're really good at what you do, but you only get paid when you're talking to people. And cassettes were just becoming popular really at that point. I mean, they've been around, but they weren't that popular. And so I started recording sessions for my clients. And then I started recording my voice and selling those sessions. And pretty soon I had a program where I only had to see my clients once a month. The rest of the time they would come in and listen to my recorded sessions, and I would do group sessions. And this became the model. And Paul and my dad both thought I was crazy.
Well, you found a way to scale.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
found a way to scale, and these guys were like dinosaurs. They were
Yeah.
like, "Oh no, you can't do that. You got to talk directly to these people. You can't tape your sessions because that you capture that moment in time. It's only good." But most people in my field, they see people for the rest of their lives. It's terrible. I mean, there's never been a psychological research that's better than 12%, and the placebo is 40. So that means they're talking people out of their change. And I was really wanting to help people make transitions and change, not
Yeah.
just keep them in therapy,
Yeah.
you know. And so part of it was, how do I empower people? And once I proved that model, and those two didn't want to do it. So that's when they let me do my own thing in Scottsdale while they were doing their own thing in Novi, Michigan, and over in Glendale, Arizona. But I was making a lot more money, getting a lot more results. I mean, I had phenomenal results happening because people could take home their therapy and do it at home.
Sure.
They didn't have to just come and see me.
So how long did you have that business?
Oh, for 27 years.
27 years. And then how did you decide to go into a franchise model? What happened with that?
Well, what happened was I went to a workshop with Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen, and we had our clinics going. By this time, I had moved to Virginia Beach, and I had just come out with my book Awaken the Genius before that, and I did a book tour where we were voted the best self-help book of the year in 1994. So I was on a book tour at Barnes and Nobles and Bookstars giving talks and all that. And I ended up in Virginia Beach, and I got a radio show I had it for 12 years. And while I had this radio show, while I had this place, and this was in the 90s, and basically we had hired a person named Janet Schweitzer, who was a very gifted marketer too, to help Cynthia. And she said, you know what? You should train people to do what you did, because I was at a conference and somebody got up and said they were going to teach us how to make $100,000 a year in therapy. And I got up and left. And the person said, why are you leaving? I said, I make more than that in a month. Why would I want to make $100,000 in a year? Our average clinic made 160,000 a month. And this was back in the 90s. So we were, because I would see anywhere between 180 and 200 people a day through our clinics. And we had a marketing machine. It was TV, radio, newspaper, back when those things worked. And and I didn't have to work. I had seven therapists, and I would be doing my thing. And I really wanted to learn how to do public speaking. So I went and took this training with them, and they said, well, why don't we teach people to do what you're doing? And that's where it started. And so I hired a firm to help me do that, and we took off. And again, it was very successful for a short period of time, all the way up until, I mean, not a short period of time, but over time until 2002, when I hired a company and their CFO embezzled $1 million from me.
Hmm.
And so I had to bring in a partner, and that partner was not, I mean, I said, just buy me out. And then, but everything that made the franchise, I kept the intellectual property, which is one key I always tell people: keep all your intellectual property, because I got paid on that for as long as that company was around. And that's when I relocated to California, and I just kind of lived off my royalties and did public speaking and, played until my sister, who was their CFO, said, Patrick, you better get back to work because this company's not going to make it, because they had a different philosophy. My philosophy has always been help people make money, not make money help people. There's a different philosophy there. And our business was 45% referrals. So we always had a big marketing campaign for new customers. But the reason we were successful was we had what we called an infinity referral system. We weren't quite there because you'd have to have 50% to get the infinity part of it down. But we were always looking for ways to basically get either doctors referrals or client referrals and build a company based on results, not on, um, you know, We didn't want to be a commodity. If I came into a market with my franchise, I'd find out what everybody else is charging, and I would charge almost twice as much because I believed that what we did was twice as good.
Listening to you, you talk a lot about marketing, right? About the importance of marketing, even as you got the operations of the business going. You got this successful business that's going for 27 years. It's making money. You're you're going to a workshop to learn more. It ends up flipping the script on them to where they hear what you're doing and say, well, let's blueprint that and
Yeah.
train everybody else to do what you're doing, which is quite interesting as well. And then that's where you start getting the franchises going on kind of selling that type of model, right?
Yeah.
But a key to what I hear you saying is you seem to prioritize a lot of your time once you moved out of kind of the operational piece of it into the priority of the marketing piece of it.
Right.
Tell us about that, why that's important for business, why that was important for yours, like your philosophy around that.
Well, my big thing is if you can't get out and talk about your product, how can anybody else?
Mm,
If you're not passionate about it, a lot of people say, well, I can't speak and do that. Well, you better get good at it, or unless you're a commodity, you're selling gasoline and you're the only gas station in town or something. But even if you're not the only gas station, you better do some marketing because
yeah,
so you can get that share. So my big thing is that, and I that's what I learned from Paul Adams. He knew how to get people in the door,
yeah,
and and he always said you have to find a pain point and find a solution. And so it's not hard in our world today to find a pain point because there's so many people suffering, but you have to have a good solution. And he always said it's better to get other people to tell the story than you. So a lot of what I did, like on my radio show, I'd bring my guest on and they would talk about their experiences at the clinic. That
yeah.
was a very easy radio show. I would interview successful people.
It's case studies, it's referral selling, it's affiliate
Yeah.
marketing in today's social media, uh,
Yeah.
approach. Yeah.
A few of my franchisees actually are some of the biggest names in internet marketing now. Rich
Hmm.
Sheffron was one of my franchisees. He learned first from my wife. Uh, David Gonzalez, who's one of the biggest in the field, he trained with my wife and learned. He was one of our franchisees in Austin, Texas. Harlan Kilstein, who's a big copywriter, he was one of our franchisees. These are all people that trained with us, and really we told people, of course, our product is helping people to stop smoking, lose weight, stop drinking, whatever it is. But really, we're a marketing machine because without marketing, it doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah.
But a lot of people think, hey, I got this degree. Everybody's going to make a lineup and come to my business, and that's not true at all. In fact, some of the poorest people in business that I know are doctors, and they're very smart people. I mean, they're super smart, but they're not smart in the ways of business. There's a whole different mindset for that, and I've been blessed. Even growing up, I had 4 paper routes. I had 27 lawns that I mowed. I had almost 54 driveways that I shoveled. I always had a business. That's
Hmm.
just my nature. And I've always in my family, as soon as you were old enough to earn money, you had to buy your own clothes. So from junior high on, my dad and mom, I mean, they had 9 kids and they didn't have a lot of money. So we helped out any way we could. And I wouldn't trade it for the world, because I learned lessons there. So many people want a hand out instead of a hand up. And I think that I always tell people, you got to do what you need to do until you can do what you want to do. So many
Boy,
people don't do what they need to do. They just want to do what they want to do. And that's not the way this universe works.
it's such an interesting balance. As I agree with you, and was raised similarly. And I think being a Navy kid, in terms of my upbringing, it really wasn't about what I wanted to do. It's what you have to do, and you end up building this mindset
Mhm.
of doing the things that are required in order to continue to move forward. A lot of times nowadays, the narrative is about pursuing your passion, and I think I see two sides of that coin. Yes, I agree. It's important to do what you're passionate about for sure, and the more it doesn't feel like work, the better, right?
Mhm.
And at the same time, I think there's some value in not asking myself if I'm happy every 10 minutes of the day. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Well, I tell people go, you're always traveling, you're always doing these things. When are you going to slow down? I go, why would I slow down? I used to do this for free. Now I get paid for it. My dad used to have me doing this stuff. He wouldn't even pay me. It was just part of the family business. You had to do it. And now, and my wife sometimes gets on me because I don't really care about the money. I mean, we make good money, but I mean, I'm not counting my money. I focus on lives I'm changing, and because the money will follow.
Yeah.
And anytime I've ever focused on the money too much, that's when my business falters.
Oh,
And
totally
I'm lucky
agree.
I can do that in my business.
Yeah.
Some businesses might not be able to do that.
Right. Agreed. Well, let's talk about that for a second. When in terms of impacting people, it's the whole reason we're doing this podcast, so people can learn and take some of the golden nuggets, if you will, from your experiences and pull them into their lives, where applicable. What are some key takeaways in the 20 before we move to BrainTap? In
Sure.
the 27 years of the business that you own, where a lot of different things happen, right? You built products, you built services, you built scalability, you did franchising. A lot of different things happened there. You built the marketing machine around it and moved from your bachelor's degree to your doctorate, all in that period of time.
Yeah.
When you look back on those 27 years, what are a couple of key takeaways, learning lessons that you would want to share with the audience that made you and your team and the people around you successful?
Well, I think you've got to find people that like doing things that you don't like doing, but you got to watch them. That's number one. When I first got married to my wife, and she still works with me. She still has an office right here with me. We've been working together ever since. Because I told her, I was straight up with her. I said, if you want to see me, you got to work with me. She goes, "Oh, I heard that doesn't work." I said, "They don't know what they're talking about." I said, because love isn't looking into each other's eyes, it's looking in the same direction. So I thought, Cynthia, she wasn't a therapist yet. I was going to train her to do it because I could train her to do it. But I said, why don't you pay the bills and I'll do the therapy? Because I don't like paying bills either, kind of like that. And so I'm walking in, working with people. I'm seeing our bills pile up, pile up, pile up. And finally, I sat down with her. I said, Cynthia, why aren't you paying the bills? She goes, that's a lot of money. She was a single mother before I married her, and she had a lot of fear on that. I said, but we have the money. I said, Cynthia, let me help you understand. It's like tithing. We have to pay the money out to get the money back. So I had a strategy that I taught her that I learned. And what it was I would always write the checks and I would thank God for my abundance to pay it. I would put the date on it that I wanted to send it. Even if I didn't have the money, I would put it in an envelope with that date, and we had a filing system. Now, of course, if the money wasn't there, we didn't send out the check. It's all about just putting the energy out there. Once we started doing that, we never looked back.
It's an interesting story about mindset. It's intentional.
Hmm.
And it's also connected with good, wanting to do something good up front, and then at the same time, in order to be able to afford it, you got to be able to, achieve. And then, but once you set your mind to a place that you said, we're going to do this, we're going to give, then you never looked back on having the ability to give.
Yeah, and then the other thing, I think one of the other things that happened was we became so successful in our first clinic when I left my dad and I got married and she was working with me that we didn't think anybody else could do this. Like we were like this mythical being, like a unicorn, that nobody else could do what we were doing. And my wife lost her voice. She had spastic dysphonia. And I went, holy crap, what's going to, all I know how to do is talk, and she'll even tell you I talk in my sleep, that's the way, that's the way it works. And so I said, I've got to record my message. That's when I started recording on cassettes.
Mm.
And that changed the whole business. Because before that, I was seeing everybody one after one after one, and I would see 12 to 14 people a day because I didn't know how to say no. If you came in, and then I started, then of course I could train people. I learned how to train people and do that. And most of the time, they were either coming in to do a class or they were listening to one of our sessions. We called them acceleration sessions. We could have never done that without the technology because the technology actually was like a digital therapist. Where before, we thought it took a therapist to relax these people or guide them through the sessions. And most of the time in therapy, you're just rehashing stuff, and it really gets boring. I mean, I don't know how people can do this for years. And then they diagnose people and no solutions. And what I did was I took NLP and I made it into a course for average people. I didn't teach them to do NLP. I had them experience NLP. So everybody that goes through a practitioner's level. Even today in BrainTap, every one of our series, even though it sounds like word soup, they're actually doing a technique. And what I tell people is and I learned this very early on in my career, most people don't know how to think. They're looking for someone to tell them what to think. So my job, I feel, is to teach people how to think. For instance, most people dwell on negative events. It's just a natural byproduct, but that doesn't serve you in any way. In fact, it makes that experience worse. In psychology, they say revivification. They bring it back, they give it life. So we would reframe it. It's a technique in NLP. You reframe it, make it black and white, learn a lesson from it. There's a lot of these little techniques like this. And I thought, everybody has this problem. It's not, I mean, everybody. 100% of the population in the world has this problem. So let's just teach everybody to do this. Associate, the old song, accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative. That's kind of the story of the human brain. And the problem is that people get stuck in these cybernetic loops where they focus on the negative. And that's because we're so prone in our DNA, it's written into our DNA that we have to survive, that we're not going to make it, that we're going to get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, or we're going to die, or whatever's going on. And the reality is that we're in a whole different paradigm now, that those fears that used to be our ancestors, but they're still showing up through, now we would call it epigenetics. They're still showing up through our genetic profile, and we don't even know where they're coming from. But we know that they're showing up because all you have to do is get married and you see the mom and dad of the person that you married show up under stressful situations because it bleeds through, right? So this retraining is all about, how do we think about ourselves? How do we think about our world? What is, like you said, follow your passion. It's really, when you're following, people say I have a passion project or whatever. The reality is that when you find what your purpose is, whatever your dark night of the soul took you through, so whatever that was, whatever got you to that point, once you conquered it, your mission is to go out and teach other people not to go through that same thing. And once you figure that out, whether it's to build a business in the tire business or to build microchips, it doesn't really matter. Once you figured out whatever that shortcoming was, now you have specialized knowledge that you can monetize and make a living at and serve humanity at the same time.
So let's get into BrainTap a little bit, and what you're doing there and the purpose as we started diving into that. You had this wonderful business. You sold it,
Mhm.
right? After 27
Yes.
years,
Mhm.
decided to then take that money and move on. I'm just curious, before we get into BrainTap and that transition, did someone come to you and try to buy it? Did you put the business for sale? What happened there?
When I had this person embezzle $1 million cash and run up all of our lines of credit, I had to find someone who would bail us out, really, in essence. So I brought in a partner, and he wasn't as ethical as I would have liked. I thought everybody operated the way that I do, and that's not true. He came in and he basically started changing the business, because when he came in, he had a deal where he could basically have control of the company for bringing in the money. What I didn't
Yes,
realize was,
you had a just the kind of learning lessons for folks, right? You had an operating agreement that allowed him as a partner to make substantial change in the business that didn't
yeah.
require your approval. He had enough decision making and voting authority, if you will, to do that.
Yeah, and he at the time had more money than I did, because I had tried to pour all my own money into saving the business. So here I am with the ideas, but I was smart enough to protect all my intellectual property, because there was a time when he sat at the table, he said, "Well, we're not going to need you anymore." And I said, "That's fine. You can just keep paying me." He goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Didn't you read any of the agreements?" He thought he got all my intellectual property, but everything that made the franchise was mine. So I left and was basically being paid the same as I was when I was there, but I wasn't there.
Yeah, I mean,
And
essentially, it sounds like he had control,
mhm,
operational control
yeah,
for decision making, but yet not ownership of the IP, right?
right.
As you said.
Mhm.
Okay, so then you transition out. You've got these royalties coming in. And then how did it come to be that you started BrainTap?
Well, during that time, I didn't give up my intellectual property on the equipment. So I was playing around with building new equipment, doing my thing, going out speaking to people, and I got hooked up with a guy named Carl Parker, who his dad started Parker University, the chiropractic school in Dallas, Texas, and he said, "Can you teach chiropractors to build chiro spas?" Because medical spas were all the rage back then, and I said, "Sure." He unfortunately he passed away like 4 years into the deal. He in then a guy named Fab Mancini, which I still work with today. He was the president at the time. He We started working together, and it expanded. And then I was buying the equipment from the same manufacturer as my old company was. When they went out of business, I wasn't ordering enough equipment like they were. So I had to figure out something different. And that's when I went and built the new device, the new BrainTap headset, because I thought I haven't changed this thing since the 90s. It's time to upgrade it. And we did some research. We were using lasers a lot in the clinic and things. And I had a clinic in Phoenix. I opened up a clinic in Pleasanton, California, just to prototype things and test things out. Um, and so we started dealing with doctors who were using lasers in the ears for different auricular points. So I designed the 9 channel auricular therapy that's in the BrainTap earphones based on that nobody had ever heard of. And those change every 2 minutes to another Nogier frequency. So we're using frequency technology and lights. And then we were able to build it into a visor at the same time. And then we started using just other things like solfeggio frequencies as well and things like that. So as we merged all that technology, I was going to start another franchise company called Solantis. But then my son and his wife decided to have children, grandchildren. And when we came to visit them here in New Bern, North Carolina, my wife said, "I don't want to live in California anymore. We're too far away from the kids." And I said, "We're going to start this company. So if we can go anywhere and start it anywhere because it's a global company. It's not." And so we sold the Pleasanton location and we moved to New Bern and we started a clinic here called Solantis, which immediately became successful, but we were on the same time selling brain taps to people. And then brain tap took off. I mean, it just like a rocket ship. It's not slowed down. I mean,
And so explain to people what BrainTap is, the product.
brain tap is a piece of technology that I have it back here. I'll show you this is what it looks like. So it has a visor with LED lights in it. This is just a mock-up that sits behind me. But there's lights in the ears. And this device uses an app. In between the headset and the app, we have proven now through a lot of different scientific discoveries. We have 12 universities, as we're talking right now, doing studies with it that I'm not paying for. The university's paying for them because we've already proven the science and what's happening. But we're basically using light, sound, and vibration to train the brain to once again become synchronized. All anxiety, depression, stress, dementia, Alzheimer's, every problem in the world, one of the key things we know about it, besides lack of breath, is the brain is dysregulated. So if we can regulate the brain, meaning just putting it into voltage, for instance, when we measure the brain through something called the WABI, which is an EEG device, if one of the hemispheres isn't 10.1 volts, it should be 10.1 volts across the frontal lobe, you're going to start developing dementia. And the further it gets from each other, like one side could be 10.1, the other side could be 9, you've got full-blown Alzheimer's. What we do is we bring photic energy and light into the brain through retinal flashing. Your eyes, actually, part of what your eyes do, besides seeing the world and helping you navigate, you have more mitochondria in your eyes than any other area of your body. So mitochondria is bacteria that's not you. It's actually bacteria that's in you, and its whole function is to bring energy to the cell. So it does that by absorbing light energy and transmitting light energy. As we're sitting here, have you ever heard of a guy named Tom Brady?
Of course. Yeah.
So Tom Brady is our exclusive provider to the sports industry because he uses BrainTap and his group TB12 do it because what we showed was that we are all light beings. That seems a little metaphysical, but it's a truth. And they can actually measure it. Tom Brady has clothing called TB12 recovery wear. That recovery wear was designed by my science officer. And because we all transmit 810 nanometer light, every person does, you can wear this clothing and then you reflect back your own light energy to heal you and help you to recover. Now that's proven in science. So when we brought to them this headset and they started using it, it was just a natural
Yeah.
evolution. So what it does is it brings light into the brain. Light creates vasodilation, blood flow, and circulation improvement through nitric oxide. That's your body makes that itself. So basically, we're using the mechanisms that the body already does because we do this naturally in nature, but we're imitating nature. So we're going to take you on a trip without you leaving the farm. In other words, you just sit down, you put the headset on. Your body doesn't know the difference between real or imagined. So we can set up the frequencies of you sitting by the ocean, for instance. The ocean has a resonant frequency of 10 hertz. That happens to be alpha. So we can create that field. Your brain is interpreting that field, and then every cell of your body through something called mirror neurons is actually vibrating to that. We now know that every cell of your body is changing. I mean, every DNA pair in your body is changing every 40 seconds. So you are a different person. Either the food you consume, the water you drink, the people you hang out with, the environment you're in, all of that is playing into you showing up as your best self or as your not so best self.
Hmm.
You know, that's why they say if you're hanging around five alcoholics, you're probably going to be the sixth. You
Yeah.
know, if you're hanging around five business owners that are successful, you're probably going to be the sixth
Right.
because you're going to learn from them in that way.
So what kind of research, like scientific research and data, has been done to prove out results around this?
Yeah, we have a whole research packet. People can go on Amazon, just put my name in, you'll see all the studies. We have 17 peer-reviewed published studies that are in there, but the main ones that I like to quote, the first one we did with National Institute of Health was we took people that were non-meditators and we had them do one session of brain tap. What we showed was one session of brain tap lowered their stress levels by 39.8%. And then if they used the brain tap at least 3 times a week, which is every 72 hours, a month later, that would be their baseline, meaning that they would wake up that in that condition. So it's just like weightlifting, you know, it takes some time to do it.
Sure.
That's one study that we were like. Now that study's now in over 1,000 people are in that study. Those numbers have not changed. It's pretty much stays around that same thing. We did a study with women 55, 65 years old, and they were all diagnosed by their doctor with dementia. And this was done in Tampa, Florida with a Dr. Kelly Miller. And he actually wrote a book about it now called Saving Your Brain. He's got a chapter, Brain Tap to the Rescue. And what we did, now you can get better results if you use more than just brain tap, but the study, of course, has to be just brain tap. So I'll kind of fill you in. So we had them do we had them go to their doctor. They validated that they were on the dementia study. We had them do the Cambridge science scoring. They were on the dementia study. We had them do all the cognitive testing. Their brain was just what I was saying. They had different voltage across the frontal lobe, everything, all the symptoms, everything you would think of. For 6 weeks, we had them wake up in the morning, do a brain tap session to train their brain in SMR, which is sensory motor rhythms. And this is the one we need in the morning. We call it digital coffee because it wakes up the brain. And then we have a session in the middle of the day as a reboot. It's a deep theta training, like a recycle training. And then we have sleep RX, which puts the brain to sleep. We had them do that for 6 weeks. Then we sent them back to their doctor. Their doctor was blown away. He said, you know, what happened? If you'd have came to me like this 6 weeks ago, I wouldn't have diagnosed you. And they said, well, we're using this machine, it flashes lights. And of course they said, it can't be that. What else did you do? But every person across the board was taken off the dementia spectrum. And what we showed was they had 39% more neuroplasticity. Now, neuroplasticity is our brain's capacity to do work and its energy, and we can measure ATP production in the brain. So by providing the brain with ATP, through light, sound, and vibration, the brain was able to wake up. Now, there's a lot of studies on that now. Like at MIT, we went to Lou Tai did a research study that showed 40 hertz frequency breaks down amyloid plaque and helps people, and they were getting 6% increase in GABA. Well, we did a study where we showed every person who does brain tap gets a 21% improvement in GABA because it's not 40 hertz frequency that does it. And this is another sign that you can be overeducated and not know what you're talking about
Yeah.
because it's basically the brain learns best under stress, just like our muscles. We have to stress them out to get them to build. You can't go to the gym and just look at the weights. You got to lift the weights, right? So the brain has to do something, has to take action.
Yeah, it has to have some level of exercise, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so we're teaching people to do that. Now, we have another study. There's lots of studies. This will be the last one, then we can go on to the next question if you want. But there's a lot of studies. The biggest one that we did just finished in Brazil, where we beat out opioids in 3 different pharmaceutical studies. And we did this in the pharmaceutical college. So every study was actually ran as if it was a pharmaceutical. And this was for women 55 years and older with fibromyalgia. We beat out opioids in all 3 studies with significance. In fact, to the degree that now the Brazilian government is figuring out how they can call brain tap a digital drug.
Is it fair to say that one of your goals is to reduce the use of opioids worldwide through the technology of BrainTap?
Yes, for sure, because our body never gets addicted to our own neuroscience because our physiology is such that one new thought can create up to 3,000 different neurochemicals. So the most powerful pharmacy on earth is not in the corner drugstore, it's between our ears.
Yeah, it's in your brain, it's in your head. Yeah. Let me ask you another question. I'm really interested in this subject. I went to a fundraiser, the largest brain injury fundraiser um, in Arizona just a few months ago this year. I have personal relationships with people who've had brain injury of different types. And my mom got in a car accident, had brain injury, and ended up really impacting her memory and short-term memory. And it impacted her for years. And then my girlfriend's daughter ended up having brain cancer at a very young age, and has had a significant impact on her. And I'm just wondering, are there a variety of uses for this? What are the primary use cases in which you're hoping this solution ultimately can impact?
Well, we have over 2,000 sessions. So one of the biggest problems we have is it works for everything because your brain controls literally everything. So we have 2 different programs for cancer. One is if you're working with your medical practitioner, it's called Coping with Cancer. It helps you to reduce the stress while you're going through treatment. And then we have one if you're in the recovery phase, it's called Say No to Cancer. So you can, because the trauma, the PTSD that people go through when they have that kind of recovery, we have sessions for grieving.
What about staying on the cancer subject? What about if there was injury from that? Like, for an example, a stroke that may have occurred post-surgery, a brain tumor is removed, something along those lines. Can this help with repair?
Well, we can't make that claim specifically, but what we can do is say that light therapy has been proven to create vasodilation, blood flow, and circulation. And we do have a program called Healthy Heart Program that they use at Toronto Hospital for stroke victims. We've had very good success with it. But I mean, we need to the problem is that most people don't get the toxins out. There's only 3 reasons why the brain would not work correctly: thoughts, traumas, or toxins. So somebody's thinking isn't right, they just can't get going. Maybe they have some kind of mental block. And number 2, maybe they had an injury like you're talking about, something happened and the brain
Yeah.
gets damaged. And then number 3, there's too many toxins. Now, when your brain gets damaged, we did a study in Gaylord, Michigan with Dr. Arkefeld, and he's the school physician. So anybody who had a concussion during the year, they went to him, and every other person was put into the study. I mean, everybody was put in the study, I should say. Every other person was put on brain tap. So they didn't get to take it home. They didn't use it other than after therapy. So let's say you went through your protocol to get your concussion, whether you're a cheerleader or a football player. And then at the end of the year, when they when they went back to play, when they had the return to play policy, a year from that date, we did a neurological test on everybody that year. The study showed that between 30 and 70% neurological improvement of those who used brain tap during their recovery rather than not. A year later now, not during for sure, but a year later. So when people say, what's the long-term effect? The quicker we can get to the brain and get it detoxed, because we got to get the toxins out. And this has to do with sleeping. Our biggest thing that we do is help people sleep. When you sleep, there's a part of the body called the glial lymphomic system. And this they just discovered in 2015. In American Scientific, they have a whole article about it, the garbage system of the brain. And if you look at physiology books before 2015, you'll notice that there's no lymph system beyond the neck. Now, this is impossible because if you took physiology in college, they'll tell you anywhere there's a blood vessel, there's a lymph vessel. But our brain is very protective. So just like it has a blood-brain barrier for supplements and nutrition and things getting into the brain, it also has a block on things leaving the brain. So this garbage man of the system only opens up during level 4 sleep. So if you're not sleeping and you're not getting deep sleep, and this does not have anything to do at all with length of time, you could sleep 4 hours a night and your brain would be fine as long as you get 1 hour of deep sleep and 2 hours of REM sleep. So, but the problem is some people lay in bed for 10 hours and only get 3 to 4 minutes of deep sleep. And we proved that when we worked with coal miners in Australia. They were sleeping for 10 hours, but getting less than 5 minutes of deep sleep. And their brain just wasn't able to operate.
So interesting. So where are you now with this journey? As it seems like you're getting some traction here with BrainTap, right? Are you at the place like where are you trying to go with it from a business standpoint and from
We
a
just signed an agreement with a big company that is in the direct selling industry because they can get it out to other countries very quickly. They have 60,000 salespeople,
okay,
and they're gonna start doing home parties, and it's called Awakened. And we couldn't be happier. And also Tom Brady's group. I mean, we're getting it out to the sports world. Those are the two main ways that we're doing it. And I think we have to make it. The reason I went to all the doctors, we have 4,000 clinics out there using it right now, is because the doctors have access to those people most in need. They're
yeah,
coming in, they know who they are. But doctors, they're great practitioners, but they're not really good salespeople. So we're not getting it in the hands of the people because you can do this every day. And you don't have to be a clinician. It's not like using a laser or something that would be dangerous. And the whole family can use it. So when somebody's going through their struggles, like for instance, we work with autistic children, we have a great program for autism. We recommend the parents do it because we've done a test with parents of autistic children and they have PTSD.
sure.
So they need to deal with it too. They're not sleeping, they're not eating properly, they're worried all the time, their stress levels are through the roof. So it's something the whole family can do. So it's my part of my mission really is to show that this is just like the television. There was a time that we didn't have television. I mean, when I was growing up, I remember getting my grandparents' first black and white television. We didn't have a television before then. They brought it over and we're like, wow, what's this mystical box? Now, our home has like four of them. It's like, I think that's what's going to happen with BrainTap or some technology like that.
Is it your goal to create this as a B2C consumer product that there's one in every household kind of concept?
And that's the hope with this awakened group is that they'll be the ones because they know how to do that.
Got it. Okay. So what bringing this back around a little bit, what would you say are the 2% factor moments in launching BrainTap and building that into the business? Like what are the key takeaways similar to what we talked about in your experience with the 27-year business, right? What are the takeaways in BrainTap that are important business elements or decisions that you made through this journey so far that would be interesting takeaways?
I think the biggest thing was to create the app. That was a real struggle for me at first because I was making quite a bit of money selling CDs and cassettes. But when I saw the cassette business drop, I mean, one minute we have a warehouse full of cassettes, the next minute they're grinding them up because nobody wants to buy them anymore. And the same thing happened with CDs. And then we started doing downloads and thought that was the end of it all. We're going to sell these downloads at, $30 to $45 each. And we were doing really well, not anywhere near where we're at now, but it was a big stress point. I'm going, we'll try it. I don't know if it's going to work. And basically for the cost of one download, they get access to 2,000 sessions a month. So it's a totally different model. I went from having people buy a CD every week to have a different CD, and had a like an army of people doing that, to now they only need to buy the download, they only need to buy the subscription. But now we have in like 120,000 people.
Is that back with the previous business, or is that in BrainTap you also
That's
had?
with BrainTap. We first started BrainTap. Yeah, we didn't have an app until like 6 years ago.
Okay. All right. So that was a game changer for you, creating the
Yes,
app
that was a
and
big game changer. And it was kind of frightening at first because I was so used to having something tangible that people could hold on to. And uh, apps aren't cheap to make. They're they're very expensive, and they're never stop. It's like now we have our whole engineering team that I have to keep fed and clothed and housed. So
are you also trying to grow other distribution models? You have the partnership with Awakening with TB12 and Tom Brady. Are you trying to do, other methods in terms of distribution?
well, we do. We also do. We kept for ourselves also the influencer model. We do a lot with people like I'm a good friend with Mariel Hemingway. So she has a foundation for mental wellness. Her family has a lot of suicides in their family. So we do work with them. I also really want to do more with the veterans. We've been doing a lot of um, research with them, and I'm sponsoring a group of Green Berets that are going to be rowing a boat across the ocean, and they're going to be using Brain Tap. They're 2 hours on, 2 hours off, and while they're on their off time, we're going to have them doing Brain Tap to recharge their batteries, and it's all for awareness to PTSD. So those kind of things I really want to get more into, and of course, we're always looking for you know distribution channels like corporations. I have a new book that's being shopped right now called Brain Fitness Blueprint with Rashika Sakri, who she used to run all of Google's wellness programs, and she retired from there. And so we're writing this book because I want to get out to corporate America and do more corporate trainings, which I haven't had time to do, but now I should be freed up to be able to do those kind of things. So I think we need to change our work environment. People should be doing brain breaks, not coffee breaks.
Let's talk a little bit about that because, the workplace is evolving, right? And I mean, when you look at tech as an example, started coming out with sleep pods. Google was famous for them, and other organizations where you could actually take a nap at work to rest your brain and come back in fully charged and ready to go. Are you seeing a larger level of acceptance, if you will, from corporate America into understanding the importance of brain health as a part of overall wellness?
Oh yeah, I think they're being pressured to do something. A lot of them are creating escape rooms. Even your amusement parks are creating escape rooms for people who are too stressed out. People are like so stressed right now and they don't know how to get rid of it. And the difference between taking a nap and doing a brain tap session is pretty significant. Most people don't know how to nap, like take these power naps like you read about, they get groggy and they really don't serve them. Most people need a 4 hour cycle to sleep, not a 20-minute. So with brain tap, we can do it in 10, 15, or 20 minutes, and they cycle through that sleep.
I was just reading on the how inefficient people are typically with when they wake up, they hit the snooze button and they go back to bed, kind of thing, right? And so there's so many people that are used to that from their cell phone and they'll snooze and they'll go back to sleep, and how it actually hurts you more than it
Right.
helps you because you actually don't fall back into that deep REM sleep, for a long enough period of time to have a benefit. You actually drag on in an unhealthy way.
That's why we created the what we call digital coffee. It's 10-minute sessions that SMR is a brainwave between awake and asleep. And it's kind of like that twilight sleep that people get. But we can take somebody through a cycle and finish their sleep cycle. And when you do that, you actually trigger norepinephrine, cortisol, and dopamine, which is what we need in the morning. We don't need that in the evening, but we need that in the morning to wake up. And so it's all a function of your brain. So if we can, and what we tell people is the average person hits their snooze button 2 to 3 times, which is pretty crazy. So we
Right.
said, instead of hitting your snooze button, reach over, grab your brain tap, do your 10-minute session, and you'll wake up charged. And you'll finish up that sleep cycle. It's kind of like having an earworm where you have a piece of music in your ear and you can't get rid of it. And then you finally, they say, hum into the tune and it goes away or whatever. It's kind of like that kind of thing that happens. Once the brain finishes that cycle, it goes on to its daily cycle instead of its nighttime ritual cycle.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think I'm seeing it. I'm seeing that as well. Like corporate America's stronger interest in how to think differently about wellness and how to expand their wellness offerings. You know, the importance of human health, body, mind, spirit, if you will, relative to performance.
Yeah, we did a study with the Googlers and the Microsoft people with Julia Arndt. She's a peak performance expert, and she was already getting good results with it. But we took her course and made it a brain tap course, and we had them do it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Most people don't realize at 2 o'clock in the afternoon your temperature drops 2 degrees. Everybody's. Now, if your brain's dysregulated, it drops more than that. That's why some people get cold in the afternoon. And that's why they get hungry too. Most people run out and get their coffee, their tea, their chocolate at that time. But really, it's because our bodies are recycling and they're designed to live in the Serengeti, not in New Bern or Arizona or wherever. We should be taking a nap, a long nap, not a short power nap. So that's when we said just do 20 minutes at that time. The most significant thing we found was we improved their depression score 70%. These people, if they had went to a psychologist and took that test, they'd have been on an SSRI. Their happiness score improved 43%. Their productivity went up 19%. And it's all documented to the point that now anybody who takes Julia's course gets a brain tap with it,
Hmm.
and she's continuing on with the study. And just that little brain break, instead of going, and you can have your coffee if you want when you're done, but do this before you do your coffee, and it wakes your brain up and you start operating. They've proven that in the morning we're more creative, we're better at problem solving. So what I tell people is you get 2 mornings. You get the one in the morning and you get the one in the afternoon, and you get more work done, more efficient. And then some people will do it right before they go home too, or at home, so that they have the energy to be with their family.
Yeah. No, I can completely relate to that. I set up pretty regularly these meetings that I refer to them as coffee chats, and it's a creative session to just talk about things and what are we trying to do business wise? How do we get there? But it's always in the morning, to your point, because we're always more creative in the morning. And
Mhm.
you know, if you can double that up, then give yourself an opportunity to do that twice a day. It certainly would create a higher level of effectiveness. Very, very fascinating, amazing to. I'm really interested to see. There's so many different areas that this can have an impact. I'm interested to see where it ends up having the biggest impact and taking off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of schools becoming interested. We have a school in India called the Creative School. They actually have a brain tap in every classroom. There's a couple schools in New York that now, private schools that have bought a brain tap for every student. And, these are because we know that once the brain is balanced, you're smarter. So they want to and also de-stress them because kids are stressed too. So I think education's a big place for it. Of course, in the medical treatment, we don't change the medical treatment. What we do is we use the brain tap right after all of the therapy that they're getting from their PT or whatever's going on, because that can stress out the body.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting because I think generally the population globally understands the importance of brain health. You know, I think people do get that. I wonder. I was going to ask you this. I wonder if there's more acceptance right now in communities. Communities more like yoga communities and other areas where they're trying to explore mental health perhaps in different ways. Have you found there's a different level of acceptance maybe in the more creative communities as compared to more traditional routes?
Yeah, we really haven't hit the yoga communities and those kind of things, because they have that it's not created here kind of mentality. You know, a lot of people think it's just to give you an example. When I went to Ames Paul and I showed him our results, and Dr. Varun, who's now an advocate, but at the time he says, Patrick, because we took a guru, we measured their brain. Then I took people that had never meditated, and I had them going in the same brain states as these gurus and had never meditated. And he goes, "You're cheating." And I said, "Varun, have you ever meditated to a candle?" And he said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Well, a candle flickers at 10 hertz frequency, so you're cheating. It just happens to be the technology you had at that time." I said, "This is new technology." I said, "You ever wonder why the gurus go to the Himalayas to meditate?" And he said, "Well, they're at peace." They do. I said, "No, the mountains resonate at 7.8 hertz frequency. That happens to be theta. Each of these brainwaves creates different neurotransmitters. They create acetylcholine and GABA. These are precursors to DMT. So if you want to have a spiritual experience, you need to activate these regions of the brain so you have these spiritual experiences. And it's a function of your physiology. So our environment creates that. So and so we're just using the latest technology. Yoga is a technology. And if you yoga, most people don't understand yoga was invented so that people could meditate because it takes energy to meditate. A lot of people jump up and they miss out on, if you go to India, they'll tell you the most important pose in yoga is the corpse pose. That's the one you do at the end of the yoga class where you just lay there. That's when you get all the neuroplasticity. But people will jump up because they think they're doing nothing. But that's when your nervous system is doing all the work. That during that rest and recovery time. That's why we love Tom Brady's group, because they're all in, they call what we do prehab instead of rehab. So we're prehabbing the brain instead of having to rehab the brain. And I think that's where we're going to find it, is that people understand that you can, some of these conditions that we think are normal are just because our body's wearing out because we haven't prehabbed it. We haven't trained our body to handle those things. And, it takes somebody like a Tom Brady who's 40 years old playing, professional sports to show people, hey, if you take care of your body, you can last a pretty long time.
Absolutely. A lot of people are going to understand that. What's the biggest objection that you get to brain tap, and what do you say to that?
Well, a lot of people think that just because we have research doesn't mean it's going to work for them. They think somehow their physiology is so different and alien from the hundreds of thousands of people that we've had on it that they go, well, it could work for them, but not for me. That's probably the biggest objection. And even though we have a lot of science and we've been gathering science since the 80s, some people, because it's not science on specifically what they need, they don't think it's going to work for them. But even the National Institute of Health says 97% of all illness is exacerbated by stress. So even if you just take stress off the table, you're going to lead a better life, so, but I think that's the biggest thing. And some people also, the headset, we think it's a bargain. I mean, back in the 80s, I charged $500. It's only $647 for the headset. I mean, that's not a big increase since the 80s, but still, it's out of the range for some people, or they don't want to invest the time. They'll go buy a TV or they'll go to the movies once a week, but they won't take care of their health by investing in something that's less than a cup of coffee a day, basically less than $1 a day, really. So, those are the things. I mean, people will fight for their limitations too. They believe that their situation is so severe and so difficult that nothing this easy couldn't be this easy.
Yeah, good. Well, very, very interesting. Giving people some things to think about. Um, and not only that, along the way, telling your story that has so many. It's really interesting hearing you talk about your journey, because there are a lot of challenges within it. Some things that didn't go well, right? Some tough partner, things you learned in your childhood, um, taking some risks along the way. Some that were pragmatic, and others that were a bit spiritual, where you believed you should head this direction and do this and pursue this. And then now here you are through all of this, creating something to, hopefully will impact people in a positive way. Really tremendous story. Appreciate it.
That's, when you think about it, I didn't think about all this when I was doing it. I was just basically first creating just something for myself, and then it's created this, you know.
Let me ask you a question. We always end the podcast with this one final question. It'd be interesting to see what you say to this. When you look back, what would you say to your 22-year-old self?
It's going to be all right. Don't worry about it. You know, there's going to be good and bad, but it's all going to turn out fine because there's a higher power than you that's controlling this destiny, because certainly not me. There's something else at work here making it work.
Got it. I love it. Relax the brain. It's going to be okay.
Yeah,
Don't overstress it.
right.
All right.
Yeah, if I could tell, if I could say I'm from your future, believe me, it's not as bad as you think. You know?
Everything you're worried about, it's going to be
Yeah,
okay. I
right.
love it. All right, good. As we end up, is there anything you'd like to promote in terms of your business, et cetera?
Well, just go over and visit us at braintap.com. We have a 14-day trial. You know, you can start using it on your app tonight. 90% of people will have a good night's sleep tonight. And then if you like that and you want to go further, you can look into the headset. You know, we have that offer, but we want people to try it first and see how they respond to it. And then hopefully it'll work for you and you can get rid of some of that stress.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining, Dr. Porter. Really appreciate it. Tremendous information that you shared along the way, and really wonderful 2% factor moments that I think people can learn a lot from. And thank you for joining. In terms of our audience, please subscribe to our channels to hear more around these wonderful people that are bringing incredible 2% factor moments to share so you can learn from them. Thank you all to everybody. Please like and comment. And thank you again, Dr. Porter.
Thank you.